The struggle for independence in Africa and Asia. The fight for independence that took place in Africa and Asia throughout the middle of the 20th century is often regarded as one of the most important and formative events in the history of modern times. The period in question was characterized by significant political upheaval, a cultural resurgence, and a zealous pursuit of self-determination and independence. In this video, a complete examination of the independence movements that took place on various continents is presented. The research delves into the movement's beginnings, significant events, and enduring legacy. The European conquerors who established control over huge regions in Asia included the British in India, the Dutch in Indonesia, the French in Indochina, and the Spanish in the Philippines. These colonizers were responsible for the establishment of these territories. Colonial regimes were responsible for the establishment of foreign control, the suppression of local cultures, and the extraction of resources for their profit, all of which had a lasting impact on the populations that they dominated. The primary motivators behind independence movements, nationalist movements, and cultural revival. The desire to recover cultural identity and self-governance was the driving cause behind the rise of nationalism as a significant force in both Africa and Asia. In India, the Indian National Congress, which was led by prominent individuals such as Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, was the driving force behind a movement of peaceful resistance against the rule of the British. Through the use of satyagraha, which translates to truth force, Gandhi was able to inspire millions of Indians to join the fight for independence, which ultimately resulted in the British withdrawal and the partition of India in 1947. As nationalist movements gathered momentum in Africa, leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, and Leopold Sedar Senghor in Senegal galvanized their countries against colonial control. These leaders were able to mobilize their countries against colonial rule. Establishing the foundation for the decolonization of the continent, these leaders placed a strong emphasis on the necessity of national unity, cultural revitalization, and economic self-sufficiency throughout the continent. Exploitation of the economy and shifts in the global economy. The economic exploitation of colonies was a fundamental grievance that drove independence movements. The resources of colonized countries were frequently taken for the profit of colonial powers, which resulted in significant economic marginalization of these regions. At the same time, when colonial powers were experiencing financial strain and increased demand from their populations to surrender control, the economic effects of the Great Depression and World War II further aggravated the discontentment that was already present. The pace and character of decolonization were both influenced by the global economic shifts that occurred after World War II. These movements included the fall of economic dominance in Europe, as well as the advent of the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers. The economic and political climate that prevailed after the war created a situation in which colonial powers were increasingly unable to maintain their empires, which resulted in the acceleration of independence movements. Cold War dynamics and the influence of international actors. During the process of decolonization, the role that international organizations played as well as the developments that occurred in global politics were extremely important. With the founding of the United Nations in 1945, a platform was made available for the promotion of self-determination and independence. The rights of colonial peoples to exercise self-governance were endorsed by the United Nations Decolonization Committee as well as by several resolutions. Additionally, the environment of the Cold War affected the independence movements. There were frequently demands placed on emerging nations to align themselves with either the Western or Eastern Bloc. This geopolitical struggle had an impact on the character of post-independence governance and economic policies of newly independent states, which were navigating the complexity of Cold War politics at the time. Significant movements for independence. A significant point in the anti-colonial movement was India's fight for independence from British rule. Pakistan was also a part of this movement. In conjunction with several other political and social organizations, the Indian National Congress spearheaded an ongoing battle against the rule of the British. A large number of people participated in the Quit India movement of 1942, which demanded an immediate end to British rule. This movement was accompanied by massive civil disobedience. In response to the growing instability in India and the understanding that it was no longer possible to maintain control, the British government decided to withdraw from the country. The partition of India that took place in 1947 resulted in the formation of two distinct states, India and Pakistan. This process was characterized by enormous violence, relocation, and communal turmoil across the country. Within the annals of both countries' histories, the split continues to be a significant chapter. Indochina. The fight for independence in Indochina, which includes the countries of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia in the present day, was marked by intense violence. A conflict that lasted from 1946 until 1954, the First Indochina War pitted Vietnamese nationalist troops, led by the Viet Minh under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh, against French colonial rule. After the war was over, the Geneva Accords were signed, which resulted in the temporary division of Vietnam into North and South respectively, which led to additional strife. There was a complicated conflict that involved both domestic and foreign forces that led to the ensuing Vietnam War, which lasted from 1955 until 1975. Reunification and the formation of a communist state were the goals of the North, which was supported by the Soviet Union and China. On the other hand, the South, which was supported by the United States, tried to prevent the spread of communism rather than implementing it. Following the conclusion of the war, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia were left to deal with the lingering effects of colonial control and the legacy of combat. The decolonization of Africa was a multifaceted and progressive process as evidenced by the African nations. The leadership of Kwame Nkrumah and the peaceful transition to independence that took place in Ghana in 1957 established a model for other African countries. It was a model of peaceful decolonization, illustrating the potential for negotiated independence that the Gold Coast made its transition to Ghana. On the other hand, the fight for independence in Algeria was characterized by extremely violent conflicts. The Algerian National Liberation Front and French forces engaged in heavy guerrilla warfare and counter-insurgency operations during the Algerian War of Independence, which lasted from 1954 until 1962. The war was responsible for a huge number of deaths and a significant amount of social disruption, but in the end, it was the war that led to Algeria's independence in 1962. The degree of fighting and negotiation that occurred in other parts of Africa vary from region to region. The Mau Mau uprising, which took place in Kenya between the years 1952 and 1960, was a substantial military uprising against British rule. On the other hand, other countries, such as Tanzania and Uganda, obtained independence through more peaceful ways, both obligations and obstacles. Leaving behind a legacy that is both inspiring and difficult is the legacy of the freedom movements in Africa and Asia. After the end of colonial control, sovereign nations came into being and people were given the option to exercise their right to self-determination. The era that followed independence, on the other hand, was fraught with its unique difficulties. A great number of countries that had recently gained their independence encountered political instability, economic challenges, and social division as they attempted to traverse the remnants of colonialism. Internal disputes and battles for national unity were frequently caused by the arbitrary borders imposed by colonial powers, which frequently ignored the ethnic and cultural diversity that existed within the country. The obstacles of nation-building, economic development, and political stability were important, and many countries struggled with the repercussions of colonial exploitation and political legacies. Historically, many countries have struggled with these challenges. The people of Africa and Asia have shown that they are resilient and determined, as seen by the independence movements that have taken place despite the difficulties that they have faced. The fights for independence significantly altered the political landscape of the world and laid the groundwork for the formation of new nations and the dynamics of the global community. These nations are continuing to build on the legacies of their independence struggles, and as they do so, they are reflecting the continuous drive for self-determination as well as the ongoing efforts to resolve the complexity of their post-colonial reality. Within the context of the 20th century, the fight for independence in Africa and Asia was a significant and diverse chapter that occurred throughout that period. Self-governance, economic justice, and cultural revitalization were the driving forces behind the movements that took place in these regions. These movements revealed the strength of collective action and the enduring ability of the human spirit. The legacy of these efforts continues to be felt in the present day as the countries of Africa and Asia continue to navigate their ways toward prosperity and stability, guided by the legacies of their past struggles for independence. If you found this content helpful, be sure to like the video, subscribe for more insightful videos and updates, and don't forget to leave a comment below with your thoughts or any questions you may have. We'd love to hear from you.